About a year or two ago, I got really sick. Nothing terrible or life-threatening, really, just a bad flu. I remember having this agonizing pain in my stomach until I had to vomit. That would nearly wipe me out completely, and then the pain would return. Pain, vomiting, pain, vomiting. At one point, I remember just giving up. I couldn't handle it anymore. I was too weak and too tired. There was nothing I could do to stop this sickness, nothing I could do to escape, and I didn't feel like I had the power to even go on. I felt powerless. I didn't want to die. I wanted to get through this sickness, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed something or someone more powerful than myself to get through it. Now, not to ruin the surprise or anything, but I did survive that illness. As powerless as I felt, as awful as it was, I pulled through. That sickness turned out not to be the unconquerable foe I felt it to be at the time. That has not been the only time I've experienced powerlessness. And I imagine that all of you have experiences of powerlessness of your own. As much as we don't like it, as much as we want to deny it, we all have this experience of powerlessness. It is where we all began, helpless infants, without the power to sustain our own existence, relying on others for absolutely everything. And while we may have a brief period of relative independence and autonomy in our adult lives, there are always times that bring us low, that remind us that power is not our inalienable possession, times of illness, our own or a loved one's. Times of instability, of mental illness or grief or addiction or the loss of control over our minds or our actions. And then, if we live long enough, we get to face the constant indignities of aging, a series of painful reminders of our powerlessness in the face of time and mortality. Confronted with an overpowering foe, an enemy like illness, addiction, aging, or death, we come face to face with our own powerlessness. We hope for a way that we cannot make ourselves. We hope for help from a power that is greater than ourselves. We hope that we have not been forgotten. This was the experience of the people of Israel living in exile in Babylon. They had faced a foe of overwhelming power. The armies of Babylon had crushed Jerusalem and burned their temple to the ground. They had forced the people to march to the home of their captors. They had been powerless to stop the disaster and were powerless to reverse it. Living in poverty amidst the wealth and opulence of the evil empire that had destroyed them, the people of Israel began to feel as though God might have forgotten them. They had begun to give up hope. To these powerless exiles living without hope, the prophet Isaiah spoke of the awesome power of God. Isaiah begins by asking if the people have not heard of God before. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is God who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to live in, who brings princes to naught and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. The God that they had known from the beginning was still the God of all the universe. the God that had created the heavens and the earth. All the heavens are nothing but a curtain to this God, like a tent that God pitches for God's own enjoyment. The enemies of the people, these overpowering foes who held them captive, are nothing in comparison to God and God's power. The inhabitants of the earth are like grasshoppers. God brings princes to naught and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. As mighty as King Nebuchadnezzar and the armies of Babylon were, they were nothing in comparison to the awesome power of God. Our faith is also in this God, the one to whom power belongs, the one who created the heavens and the earth. And we too need to be reminded from time to time that God is greater than the overwhelming power of our adversaries. When I was too sick to go on, when I felt powerless against my illness, God was greater than my illness. When we are overpowered by anxiety or addiction or grief, it is worth remembering that God is more powerful than all of those foes. When we face seemingly intractable, unsolvable social difficulties like immigration and homelessness, it is enlightening to know that these are nothing before the power of God. When we have no choice but to summon the courage to face our own aging and mortality, it can be a comfort to remember that our God created time itself and has defeated death. There is no power greater than our God. As terrific as it is to know of a power greater than the problems that you are facing, it is not particularly helpful unless you also believe that this power is predisposed to helping you. After all, the very fact that God created time and space and all that is might suggest that God is a little too big and important to care very much about little old you and your petty problems. Yet as unlikely as this may seem, this is precisely the epiphany that we celebrate at this season. The sudden realization that Jesus is God with us and God for us. Not only does God remember you, God made the deliberate choice to take on human flesh so that your very humanity could be saved. God sees the dilemma of human beings, our suffering under illness, war, poverty, sin, and death, and God chooses to act with power to save us. Isaiah testifies to this very fact when he said, God gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. We all, at one time or another, face difficulties that we cannot overcome alone. We all must know the feeling of powerlessness at some point in our lives. What is important to remember, what is absolutely vital to know, is that our powerlessness is not the end of our reason to hope, but rather its beginning. When we find ourselves powerless, we must remember where true power lies: in the hands of our loving God. God is the power greater than all our difficulties, greater than our social crises, than our personal disasters, than the very force of death which we all face. Though we may be powerless, our God is not. Though we may struggle to find a way forward, to find the courage to face the day, our God does not faint nor grow weary. May we be given the faith to believe in the power of a loving God, especially in those moments when we are confronted with our own powerlessness. May we be among those who wait for God and whose strength is renewed, those who shall mount up with wings like eagles, who shall run and not be weary, who shall walk and not faint. Amen.